Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. My name is John Nilsson Wright. I am Professor of Japanese Politics and International Relations at the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. I'm also the head of the Japan program, which is part of our Indo-Pacific stream in the Center for Geopolitics, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all here for our panel discussion on war and diplomacy in an age of disorder, options for the UK and Japan. I'd first like to express warm thanks to our collaborators from Keio University and from Tokyo University, and in particular from the Fujitsu Future Studies Center for sponsoring this event and making it possible. This would not have been possible without our long-standing collaboration with our Japanese partners. The University of Tokyo, in the form of the Research Center, it's the longest acronym I've ever had to pronounce, the Research Center for Advanced Science and Technology Open Laboratory for Emergence Strategies, that Professor Ikeuchi Satoshi heads. We've had a very interesting discussion with him over lunch about the politics of the Middle East. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those themes in a little while. I'd also like to extend a very warm thank you to my old friend Ambassador Suzuki, to the Japanese Embassy for all of their support for Japanese studies at Cambridge. This is the second time you've come to Darwin, so we're really appreciative of your presence. And obviously we have a very substantive set of issues to explore today. Last year, when we met to talk about the beginning of the Trump administration, I don't think many of us would have anticipated just how much change we've seen over the course of the last year. The scale of global conflict, whether it's the uncertainty in the Middle East, particularly over Iran, the persistent war in Ukraine, President Trump's willingness to tear up so many of the norms and conventions that have defined international politics, whether it's through tariffs and the dismantling of the Bretton Woods system, the unilateralist approach to relations with Latin America, particularly, of course, the abduction of Maduro from Venezuela, the articulation of the so-called Donroe Doctrine, an evocation of 19th century imperial politics, Stephen Miller's willingness to say that the international rules-based order is behind us, and that power is the only ingredient that we need to understand in understanding international politics. And, of course, most recently, the astonishing events surrounding America's attempt to take over Greenland. And if that weren't enough, all of those challenges on the international stage are paralleled by the extraordinary upheaval in American domestic politics that we're witnessing at the moment, unprecedented scenes in Minnesota. So it seems fairly uncontroversial to say that order, however we define it, whether it's internationally or domestically, seems to be rapidly eroding. Which brings me to Japan and the United Kingdom. Two countries that have obviously benefited from that order, and in some cases have played a material role in shaping that order. And I think most powerfully here of Japan and the Abe administration, with its articulation of the free and open Indo-Pacific. Japan, under the leadership of late Prime Minister Abe, of course, played a critical role in redefining order within the region. And some of our speakers here today have been intimately associated with that process. And Professor Taniguchi from the Fujitsu Future Studies Center was a key advisor to Prime Minister Abe, was his speechwriter. I vividly remember when Prime Minister Abe came to London and gave an address at the Guildhall, listening to the translation of the Prime Minister's speech and hearing the stentorian tones of Professor Taniguchi was, I think, a real wake-up call for all of us and very unexpected. So you'll hear some of that firm delivery, I'm sure, tonight in our panel discussion. And I should also mention, of course, that Ambassador Suzuki, you spent 7 years, I think, as the political secretary to late Prime Minister Abe, so you knew him intimately. And I'm sure we will want to reflect on his legacy and what's happening at the moment under the new government of Prime Minister Takaichi, who herself, of course, owed so much to Prime Minister Abe. So today, I think our challenge with this panel discussion, which I'm very much looking forward to, will be to take stock of the current situation, to try and understand how much of a crisis we're in, how much disorder we face, to try and understand how we got to this present situation, but also, I think, to ask some very substantive material questions about what we can do next, what Britain and Japan can do next. Because I think it's worth re-emphasizing, I'm sure we all recognize how much has been achieved in the bilateral relationship in recent years, dating from the Hiroshima summit of 2023, the Hiroshima Accord that was signed very importantly in that G7 summit, the launch of the GCAP, Joint Fighter Plane Initiative, bringing together Japan, the United Kingdom, and of course Italy, the Reciprocal Access Agreement, a much more embedded and clearly defined strategic partnership. And even in the cultural sphere, our ambassador to Tokyo, Julia Longbottom, launched last year the so-called Musubi Initiative, bringing together people to people from both countries. Julia will be here in a week or so to give a talk to our own students. If you're around at the time, I recommend that to you. But she's done an enormous amount to strengthen the ties that bind our two countries increasingly closer together. And some reflection of that, of course, looking ahead to the end of this week, is that Prime Minister Starmer is on his way to the region and will be visiting Japan and also China. So it's a further confirmation of just how important the relationship is between our two countries. If that weren't enough, today marks the official launch of the general election in Japan that Prime Minister Takaichi announced last Friday. So there's an immense amount of developments that we are looking forward to discussing. So without further ado, before introducing the ambassador, I want to very briefly hand over to my colleague, Professor Brendan Sims, the Director of the Center for Geopolitics, to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you very much, John. As you just heard, I'm Brendan Sims. I'm the director of the centre. I'm delighted to be here this evening. Unlike John and unlike many people in the audience, and certainly everybody on the panel, I'm not an expert on Japan or on Anglo-Japanese relations, but I am certain about two things. The first is that in the context of the events that we just heard about and that we're all familiar with, the two leading powers of the rules-based international order, Japan and the United Kingdom, are going to need to find ways to work even closer together. And the second thing I'm sure of is that it would be hard to beat the panel we're about to hear, which looks absolutely terrific. And I'm particularly honored to have the ambassador, His Excellency Mrs. Suzuki, here again, honoring us with his presence. So that's all from me. I'm looking forward to a real treat. And I hand back to you, John, to chair the panel.
Thank you. Like all complicated plans, sometimes things go awry. And I have to say that we've lost one of our speakers, regrettably. Michael Cox, Professor of American Politics from the LSE, sends his heartfelt apologies, but he's gone down with a bad case of flu, which is not unexpected at this time of year. But I'm sure with the five of us, the five speakers on the panel, we will have plenty to discuss. But without further ado, let me turn to Ambassador Suzuki and ask him to say a few words of welcome.
John, just before we start, could you tell us the auspices of this meeting? I mean, is it off the record? Is it Chatham House Law?
This meeting is strictly on the record. Okay? Everyone happy with that? Okay.
Thank you very much, John, Professor Sims. Well, I think John had said so much by way of introducing this panel, so I won't have much to add. Let me just say a couple of words each for the Japanese panelists. Professor Hosoya, of course, he has been this prime movers in having this annual Cambridge Keio seminar, and he is the leading professor for international affairs. So I much look forward to hearing what he has to say. And Tom Taniguchi, he used to teach at Keio, but I came to know him when he became Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's speechwriter. And Tom really was more than a speechwriter. He and Prime Minister Abe would discuss time and time again and he would do extensive research. Really, so it was a policy formation process almost in what kind of new vision, what kind of new policies that Prime Minister Abe would want to launch. And Tom Taniguchi was really the best speechwriter and policy advisor to Prime Minister Abe. And Professor Ikeuchi, he is the leading Japanese professor on Middle East. And when I was serving Prime Minister Abe as his private secretary, IS, the extreme violence, was rampant, and he authored a brilliant book in Japanese. And of course, Prime Minister is very busy to read through books. So I privately asked him to come into the Prime Minister's office and brief Prime Minister Abe in a nutshell of what he wanted to share in his book. So we have the best panelists from Japan, and I am much looking forward to listening to lively discussions which are going to follow. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So, could I invite our panelists to join us at the front, in no particular order, I think. You might have to go around. Well, you can come around this way. Okay, before we get underway, the ambassador has eloquently introduced our Japanese speakers, and I would just like to sort of briefly introduce our two UK speakers. Gillian Tett, Provost of King's College, a long-standing writer and columnist for the Financial Times who spent a lot of time in Japan. You were the bureau chief in Japan for a number of years, and also in Washington. Or is that correct?
For what it's worth, I ran the American operation of the FT for about a decade out of New York, but I covered the whole of America.
Okay, wonderful. And Robin Niblett, Sir Robin Niblett, the former director and chief executive officer of Chatham House, where he's a distinguished fellow, soon to be the new warden of New College from the autumn of this year. Robin, welcome. It's great to have the chance to see you again. So, rather than have set piece presentations, I thought I would ask a series of questions to get the discussion going. We have about 45 minutes or so to cover all of the material. But I wanted to start with you, Gillian, if I may. Given all of that exposure you've had to the politics of Washington and Japan, whether you could begin by trying to sort of set the scene and give us a sense of the big picture. In Davos recently, we had the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, say that order is really behind us, as he noted. We know the world order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy. My question to you is he right in making that assessment?
Well, thank you very much indeed. Can you all hear me? Okay, fantastic. First of all, was anybody else in Davos? Because I was there last week. Let me first of all say it's a huge honor to be here. I love Japan. I was actually there 2 or 3 weeks ago. My youngest was working there last year. And in addition to running the bureau in Tokyo for a number of years, my first book was about Japan. And these days, the Financial Times, of course, is owned by the Nikkei newspaper, Nikkei Shimbuncha. And so we have a lot of connections with Japan. So it's absolutely wonderful to be here. I'm very honored. And I'm doubly honored because when I was working in Japan, a constant theme was the phrase Japan passing, because there was a feeling that everyone was watching China and kind of passing over Japan and didn't really care about Japan. Today, if anything, I'd say for many Westerners, investors and business leaders, it's actually China passing, because people are rediscovering Japan with a vengeance. And as I'm going to say in a moment, I think Japan is potentially going to play a critically important role on the world stage. Briefly, Davos last week was probably the most shocking international conference I've ever been at, and I feel it was like having a ringside seat on history. You've all seen the headlines and the aggression and the condescension and the antagonism on the part of the American delegation towards the Europeans. What I can say was that in private, amongst many of the Trump circle, it was actually considerably more stark than in public. They were almost being diplomatic in public, to be honest. So, point one, Japan and the UK, as you've just heard, have very much risen on the back of the rules-based global order in recent decades, along with countries like Singapore. That post-World War II rules-based order is, if not dead, then it's certainly very, very badly damaged at the moment. What is replacing it? Well, people talk about might is right and general exercise of power. I think to be more explicit, we have 2 or 3 key factors at play now. Firstly, we have entered a moment when geoeconomics, the use of economic and financial policies as tools of political power, is absolutely dominant. America's leading the trend, but in many ways they're building on the policies used by China in recent years. And in this new world, tech, culture, military, trade, economic, financial issues are all jumbled up together in a way that is a profound shock for anyone who built their career in the neoliberal economic era, when essentially we assumed that free markets were good, globalization was good, democracy was self-evidently good, and we also assumed that economics was something that sat in a sphere of its own, so much self-contained that it could be modeled using the tools of physics and maths. That is no longer true. Second key point, in my view, the world is now shaped by conflict between 2 hegemonic powers of US and China, with Russia sort of hovering in the middle. US has hegemonic power because it controls the global financial system to a large degree by virtue of the dollar. China has hegemonic power because it controls many key aspects of manufacturing. Tech hegemony is still being contested. And that, I think, is going to last for some time because although China's trying to break American financial hegemony and America's trying to break Chinese manufacturing hegemony, neither is going to succeed quickly. Third key point is that this leaves the so-called middle powers, to cite Mark Carney, extremely vulnerable. And that is, again, likely to stay that way for some time to come. What does that mean that they should do? And I put the UK and Japan in that category. Well, essentially, 2 or 3 key things. Firstly, be ruthlessly clear-sighted. Read Albert Hirschman. He laid out what happened in the interwar years very clearly. It is utterly relevant today. You have to be clear-sighted about the vulnerabilities. Second, think very hard about what cards you have to play, to cite J.D. Vance, i.e. what can you use as a transactional bargaining chip with America and China. Third, reduce your vulnerability to any single node. Don't trust anybody or anything. Always have some kind of backup plan, redundancy for a node gets switched off. Fourth, team up. Middle powers are going to have to team up. And fifth, think very hard about whether you can use bilateral efforts to team up to essentially create some kind of coalition of the willing to try to preserve some element of the rules-based order, some element of common values, and some common defense against these 2 big hegemonic powers. I happen to believe that Japan and the UK have a lot of cards to play and a lot of areas where they could collaborate, most obviously around robotics, AI, shipping, areas like that. We have a lot of that in Cambridge already. We should be doubling, quadrupling, quintupling down on that right now. We could team up on defense. We need to break our reliance and dependency and exposure and vulnerability to American military systems. It's going to be extremely hard, but it's absolutely critical. And we have to get serious in Cambridge about recognizing that MilTech is absolutely crucial, and we need to be putting intellectual capital and money into that going forward. 3, finance. Japan is the world's ATM machine in many ways right now, rivaling perhaps Saudi Arabia. People need that capital. That gives it a card to play with America. The Americans know that extremely well. Scott Bessent is an expert on Japan, he thinks. And the ATM aspect of Japan is critical right now, along with the robotics and AI. Things like creating a mutual aid alliance in case America switches off the dollar-based swaps network for other countries is critical today. The Bank of Japan and the Bank of England need to talk immediately about pooling their dollars in case they get cut off. Defense is critical, as I said before. And the last thing I'll say is that coming together to respect the rules-based order, coming together to try and create some kind of coalition of the willing, I think is incredibly important. Having lived in Japan, I think that British and Japanese humor, personalities, social patterns are very similar. There is a huge amount of potential for collaboration. And the last thing I'll say is this. When I ran the Japanese bureau, I had equal numbers of Japanese Americans and British. The Americans and Japanese generally did not misunderstand each other because they were both very wary of each other because they knew that they were essentially very different culturally, and they both had their guard up all the time when they spoke to each other. The Japanese and British actually did not misunderstand each other because they were actually very similar. We're the only two countries and languages I know where it's entirely acceptable to not finish your sentences and leave trailing threads and imply things that no one else can understand. The people who misunderstood each other were the British and Americans because they thought they spoke the same language, and they actually have radically different communication styles. So I leave that hanging as an example that I think there is enormous potential to build Japanese-British bridges right now. I used to talk a lot about the Financial Times and Nikkei being like FD Nikkei hashi, like a bridge, a bashi, hashi, across the two. And I think right now we need Igreso to Nikkei hashi in every sense. So, それから頑張ってください。頑張りましょう。
Tom, if I can just rescue the mic, if that's all right. Thanks. Gillian, thanks for offering a kind of optimistic path through the current predicament by stressing all of these strengths that we both have and the collaboration and the cultural ties between our two countries. Tom, Gillian mentioned this shift from a neoliberal economic world in which the market and the openness and transparency of the market has been so dominant. Japan, of course, in its early years in the post-war period, practiced a type of economic developmental state-led policy that suggested that it was, if not an outlier, certainly challenging some of those neoliberal norms. But under Prime Minister Abe, we saw a shift away from that, both in terms of a willingness to see Japan as not being isolated, to seeing it as being very much part of the liberal international order, and having political status and political power, not just economic power. I wonder if you could say, from your perspective, how that shift into a politically influential actor has happened, the role that Prime Minister Abe played, but also in thinking along the lines of the opportunities and challenges that Gillian laid out, how the current Prime Minister Takaichi, is going to build on Prime Minister Abe's legacy. Is she well placed to advance some of these areas of cooperation? What are her priorities in that respect? And how many of those challenges that Gillian laid out are going to be addressed, do you think, under her premiership?
Thank you, John. Constraints drive innovation. In the old days, you might have said, necessity is the mother of invention. Japan felt absolute need to claim who it was, what it wanted to achieve, under the challenges, enormous challenges of China. I once counted a number of FT articles that had any single reference to China, and I also counted the number of FT articles that had any one single reference to Japan, and I projected that as a CJ index. it was around 2005, the number of China-related articles on FT outnumbered Japan. That coincided with the introduction of the first Abe administration. He was the first Japanese prime minister who was not shy about anything related to value, human rights, democracy, rule of law. For many, many decades, ladies and gentlemen, after the World War II, people in Japan were absolutely shy about hoisting the flag of universal values. Not like that. Shinzo Abe felt that time was ripe for Japan to say what kind of country that was. So in that sense, constraints drive innovation. Now, liberal, illiberal, whatever you call it, the order that Japan absolutely needs is an order-based, predictable international environment without which you couldn't survive as an island nation on the periphery of the continent that includes an unlikely combination of powers: Russia, North Korea, and China. The postcode Japan has is not something that you should envy. So Japan needed to broaden its strategic space at all cost. How? Certainly, Japan's got no luxury of damaging its age-old bilateral alliance relationship with the United States, which is why Shinzo Abe played golf for many hours, because that was an ideal way for Mr. Abe to spend a great amount of time with one of the most difficult leaders of the world that humans have ever had. True. And also, he was the one who brought Japan for the first time ever closer to Australia, India, by chance perhaps to an English-speaking alliance community, if you like, if you use an old saying. In that way, Japan succeeded in broadening its strategic space. And he did it both politically and economically. Politically, he proposed a broad umbrella concept of free and open Indo-Pacific, and the backbone of which was something called Quad, the four-country relationship between India, Australia, Japan, and the United States. Economically, he handed the torch of liberalizing international trade order right after Donald Trump withdrew the United States from Trans-Pacific Partnership. Without Shinzo Abe, TPP or CPTPP would not have materialized. But he did not do it because he believed in any kind of ideology. He did it because he felt an absolute necessity to broaden Japan's strategic breathing space. Thank you.
I'd like to stay with that theme of creating strategic space because, as you mentioned, Tom, the U.S. side of Japan's foreign policy has been remarkably enhanced in recent years, whether it's by playing golf with President Trump, bringing golden golf clubs to Trump Tower, cementing a personal relationship, but also doing it in such a clear-sighted way.
And more recently, playing the drums.
Absolutely, yes, with the South Korean. So the kind of the performative aspect of diplomacy is really important, and the rhetoric has so often underlined, the indispensable nature of the alliance relationship between the U.S. and Japan. It was a former American ambassador to Japan, the longest-serving ambassador to Japan, Mike Mansfield, former senator and congressman from Montana, who talked about the US-Japan relationship as the most important bilateral relationship, bar none. And we saw that reaffirmed last October when the two leaders, Takaichi son and the US president met. There was a clear appetite and great success deployed by the government in building this relationship. But I'm struck also at the same time how often behind the scenes we hear murmurings of discontent. The sense of equality being a key element in this bilateral relationship, built up remarkably over the post-war period when you consider that the two countries had fought a long, difficult war, which ended in such dramatic and horrific circumstances. It's a real testament to the leadership on both sides. And it seems as if Americans as well as Japanese leaders have worked assiduously to build this relationship. But now, Donald Trump, in his manner, in his approach, seems to threaten that, because even though the national security strategy issued by his administration has talked about sovereignty and the importance of sovereignty, the sovereignty that matters seems to be American sovereignty, as we saw so vividly in the debate over Greenland. So I want to jump right to the end of the panel to Yuichi Osoya, who has spent so much time looking at the relationship with the United States, to ask him how he thinks about some of those private discussions. Is there a real sense that Japan is in danger of losing its influence with the United States, that its leverage is going to decline? Is there a risk that, particularly on the back of the Monroe Doctrine, the Donroe Doctrine, that the United States is no longer as clearly committed? Are there fears of abandonment by the United States? Or can we say confidently that the US-Japan relationship is still secure because of the interdependence of the two countries, because of the presence of American forces? Donald Trump has shown himself to be erratic, unpredictable. How does Japan guard against almost the unthinkable, that the United States might at some point not come to the aid of Japan, whether it's over the Senkaku Islands or over Taiwan, or North Korea, which was strikingly absent from the national security statement?
Well, thank you, John, for providing. Yes, should be okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, John, for providing me such wonderful questions, as well as organizing such a wonderful conference today. I'm very glad to be here today for many reasons, of course, but particularly with two closest advisors to Prime Minister Abe, Ambassador Suzuki, and also Professor Taniguchi, who actually supported quite strongly Prime Minister Abe's foreign policy agendas. So that's why I think, to understand the current situation, I think there are many, many lessons that we can learn from the experience of the first Trump administration when Shinzo Abe was Prime Minister then. But at the same time, I think that many Japanese experts are talking that this time is different. Number one, we don't have Shinzo Abe in Japan. Prime Minister is Sanae Takaichi, and she is brilliant, I think, in her understanding about foreign policy, security policy, but still, Shinzo Abe was quite experienced politician even before he became prime minister. But even though Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi was former minister for economic security, but maybe her experience cannot be rivaled with Shinzo Abe when he became prime minister, of course, for the second time particularly. And number two, Donald Trump is different. Donald Trump this time is different from his time in his first administration. That's why we cannot simply repeat what we did during the second Abe's administration. Furthermore, the strategic environment is again different. Russia is invading Ukraine, and China becomes much more powerful than before, than a decade ago. So in that way, strategic balance is different nowadays. So that's why many Japanese experts are now talking about the necessity of Plan B, whether we need Plan B or not. Of course, I know that many Europeans are also thinking about that. But, majority, I think, of Japanese experts, particularly security experts, usually come to the conclusion that we cannot choose Plan B because, number one, China is more powerful than Russia. So that's why to maintain a kind of a balance of power in East Asia, we cannot lose, we cannot deny the deny the presence of the United States as an important actor there, number one. And number two, in addition to that, Japan doesn't have a nuclear forces, nuclear weapons. Without having nuclear weapons, we cannot create a strategic balance with China. So in that way, we are in Japan thinking about three possible options. One is Plan A dash, and the other two are Plan Bs. As I mentioned, we generally usually come to the conclusion that it is extremely difficult to choose Plan B. But at the same time, having read both NSS and NDS, which recently appeared, we have to say that we cannot just repeat and continue the previous policy that we had. And in that way, we have to update, we have to transform our foreign policy to fit to the current situation. So Plan A dash is to strengthen the U.S.-Japan alliance by increasing, by expanding Japan's defense spending to the level of 5%. It is extremely difficult, but this is directed by the U.S. government to its allies. So we cannot simply ignore and deny those requests coming from Washington, D.C. So by expanding our defense spending to the level of 5%, maybe we can continue to have a very strong U.S.-Japan alliance. Maybe not, but maybe yes. So in that way, Plan A dash is to strengthen Japan's defense spending and also to enhance Japan's deterrence against China. But this means that we have to abandon largely our pacifist tradition that we have had after 1945. So we will have another international identity by abandoning certain elements of our pacifist tradition, which we have maintained after the Second World War. So this is the Plan A dash. The two Plan Bs. The second option that we can take perhaps would be to have a nuclear weapons. Japan goes nuclear, but many Japanese security experts simply deny the possibility and the desirability of going nuclear for many reasons. So I think that these options at this moment cannot be taken for several reasons. I don't go into the details. The number three, the third option, another Plan B, would be to enter into China's sphere of influence. Without a strong American extended deterrence, without having a strong Japanese defense forces, without having nuclear weapons of our own, maybe we will see the time frame we need to go into the sphere of Chinese influence. But I think that the majority of Japanese people cannot support this option. So maybe the only option that we can take would be perhaps Plan A dash to increase our defense spending to the level that can be acceptable by the United States government. But at the same time, Japan must be more independent and much more. Japan must have much stronger strategic autonomy, as is often mentioned. But strategic autonomy does not reject our alliance relationship with the United States. So the combination of strategic autonomy with the stronger alliance relationship with the United States would be perhaps our Plan A dash. But I don't know whether Japanese people can support this option. So maybe appeasement policy towards China can be one option that many Japanese people now prefer. But I don't think that this can be taken. And last week I commented and talked to Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Commons about Japanese policy towards China, because it seems that the current government is interested in learning from Japanese experience of striking the balance between maintaining a strong trade economic relationship and maintaining a strong deterrence towards China. So to visit China, I think that the current Prime Minister of the UK is interested in how Japan has been dealing with this difficult question. But at the same time, I think, as is already mentioned, Japan and the UK share so many things in common. So much better communication, much stronger consultation would be another important answer that Japan should take. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuichi, and that leads neatly into a discussion of another alliance relationship, the relationship between the United States and the UK. Robin, you've written extensively about the so-called New Cold War in your latest book. You've just come back from Davos, so you've seen how the leaders are dealing with the current American president and some of the fallout from that. Does Britain have a plan A- or two plans B? I mean, we are, of course, a nuclear power, so we don't face the same sort of challenges that Yuichi was describing. But public opinion is also hugely important, and Prime Minister Starmer seems to have walked a bit of a tightrope in both managing public opinion when it comes to the relationship with the United States, but also deploying a lot of soft power, including, of course, the King, most recently, judging from the letter that was sent regarding the President's extraordinary statements about British servicemen. How do you assess the way in which the Starmer administration is handling its relationship with Washington? What are the options as well for Britain to work with Japan? Because, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche to say we're two island countries with, common predicaments strategically, our own sense of sometimes isolation from the continent, and the looming threat of neighbours that challenge our interests. And of course, all of those cultural ties that Gillian helpfully referred to. So could you reflect a little bit on the current state of our bilateral relationship?
Well, thanks very much, John. Fantastic to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Great to be with Ambassador Suzuki. Brendan, great to see you again. Yuichi Hosoya, we've talked a lot about the role of think tanks and how important it is these days for Japan to have its own independent voice and not just simply be an adjunct, especially to US think tanks in today's world. So I think the work you and others have done in this space, obviously Professor Ikeuchi as well, has been incredibly useful on this front. And I remember Prime Minister Abe's speech very well at the Guildhall, because I had the honor of posing the questions to him at that time. There was a kind of partnership with Chatham House. So you were in my ear, most definitely, Tomohiko, Professor Taniguchi. And I always remember your wonderful phrase about tackling that third arrow, the big challenge for Japan of regulation. I will be the drill bit, that will burrow its way through regulation. I'm not sure if that was successful, but it was a brilliant turn of phrase, which has always stuck in my head. So a great honor to be with everyone here. Let me say a couple of things, because I wanted to pick up on Gillian's comments about, and I agree with her entirely, being on the ringside, a ringside seat on history, and then fold it what it means to our relationship with the US and maybe with Japan. Because I think the context is incredibly important if we're thinking about what we do now. I think we're in limbo, where we're at the end of one order, which is over. I would agree with that. But we've no idea what the new one's going to be. There may not be a new order. It may be disorder for quite a period of time. Gillian, I thought you had a very good piece in the FT about the difference between risk and uncertainty. And we're definitely in this period of uncertainty, which is much harder to deal with in some ways than risk. But in that context, something about China, one of my takeaways from this Davos, and it's important, I think, for where Keir Starmer is right now, is that China was brilliantly absent. It just let America get on with, as many people have noted, sort of destroying definitely its soft power. But one of the messages I took away as well is that it is still on a journey towards success. We all know it faces huge challenges, but one of the most important journeys to success is this mixture of software and hardware. Its capacity to have a massive single market where it can combine manufacture with technology to scale new heights. So China is passing in some ways, but China is also still on the way up, which is a contradiction. Same with the US. I felt, weirdly, it was like peak Trump. It was a humiliating climb down in the Congress Center, dressed up with lots of, being rude to Europe in particular. And seeing him climb down a little bit yesterday in Minnesota, we'll see. It may be a moment where we may have a more dangerous Trump if he thinks he's having to climb down, something to come back to later on. But I definitely don't think it's peak America. And again, Gillian will be a better assessor of this, maybe some of my Japanese colleagues, but I think the US is still doing amazing things. And we're in a world, and this is what Britain and Japan have to recognize, where neither China nor the US alone may dominate technology, but together, each of them separately are almost all technology, 80, 90% of certainly the really kind of hard edges of it. So we as Brits are stuck in this position where we are bit players on some of the main dynamics of history. So what have we been doing? I think we have quite rightly been buying time. We're buying time because, as Yuichi said, we also depend on America right now. We might not like it, but we still do. It's going to take us 4 or 5 years to get to whatever percentage of GDP we'll be spending. And obviously the 5% is really 3.5% plus 1.5%. But we need to keep America on side because we cannot afford to lose Ukraine. And you have to keep America on side, Japan, because you cannot afford to take on China by yourselves at this time with your relationship with South Korea being so complex. So I think to your specific question, John, what the UK and Starmer has been doing is trying to buy time to solidify the relationship with the EU, which is important, to see whether there are parts of the US administration in which you can draw practical bridges, minerals partnerships, for example, being one area where I think the G7 may continue to exist. I've been interested to see that the US administration has not entirely abandoned the WTO, seems to think it could be useful in certain spaces. Our security relationship at the intelligence level just does not work without the US. And we've heard Blaise Metroelli, the new head of MI6, basically say that. So I think we're in a position, John, where the UK has to stick with a plan A minus because it's going to take us at best 5 or 10 years to be in a position where we, along with our European partners, can defend Europe in any sort of meaningful way. And I think, and I don't want to be too sanguine about this, but there has to be a question of what kind of America will we see when Trump steps down as president, however messy that process turns out to be. I heard somebody make a very good point in Davos. Somebody said, we've got to be careful as Europeans not to perpetuate a relationship with America that is defined by Trump. Because in the end, I think, again, I'd be interested to hear other people's views, an America of 350 million people that wants to be, not allow anyone to dominate either Europe in the long term, I think, or definitely as the new national defense strategy says, not have anyone else dominate the Indo-Pacific, they're going to have to do it with allies. They've committed to defend the first island chain. They haven't drawn, as far as I can tell, a new Aitchison line that I know is such a concern to my Japanese colleagues, excluding certain parts of the first island chain. So I think that we need to play it long. And I wouldn't be going for plans B. I thought your plan Bs were slightly strawmanish, if I may say so. I don't see Japan going nuclear, and I don't see it being in China's sphere of influence. So, yeah, I think we're all stuck with plan A minus. And if we're both stuck with plan A minus, then Japan and the UK can do things together. Because it is about, GCAP, it is about deepening our bilateral investment. It is about trying to keep the G7 alive through the storm of Trump and see if it's a valuable community of shared values. I very much agree with you. You cannot build mutually reliant supply chains for a world of geoeconomics that I completely agree with Gillian is the world we're in, with countries you don't trust. So we've got to hang things together and hope that when Trump is gone, we've invested enough ourselves in building stronger alliances that we can team up with future American administrations. They may be equally brutal. Past ones were brutal as well. I don't think we'll have anything like Trump for a while. Last point, because I didn't want to leave it off, because it all sounds, one thing I learned in my time at Chatham House, having sort of not seen Brexit come. So we haven't talked about the weakness of our countries inside. So these are all great ideas, but who will be in the government in Britain in the future? Who will be in the government in the Elysee? Who will be in the government in Germany? Maybe Japan has a slightly more consensus-built system for the moment, but in Europe we're about to go through a very bumpy phase through which to try to be rational with plan A's. A lot of people are looking for plan B's politically right now, at least domestically.
Gillian, I think you wanted to come in.
I'll say a couple of quick things following up from Robin. Firstly, if Japan doesn't hit 5% of its of GDP for military spending, it will face intense pressure to buy lots of American long-dated treasuries. And so one of the ways that they're passing things in Washington right now is to basically have long-dated treasuries purchased instead in lieu of military spending, potentially, point one. So I'd love to hear from the Japanese friends what they think about that. Secondly, rare earth minerals is obviously an area where Japan has got lessons to teach the rest of the world. I was with a number of the military leaders about a year ago in America, and I was shocked by how ill-prepared everyone seemed to be, given Japan's experience in this respect. And that can absolutely be an area of collaboration, and it's one of the key cards for Japan right now. Third quick point, Japan's system of trading companies is an absolute jewel in the crown and one of its real strengths. And it's kind of shocking that no one else has copied that, and they should. I won't go into details, but I think it's completely underappreciated because they're barely ever covered. But the trading houses are critical right now. And I had a fourth point I can't remember, but stakeholder capitalism. Japan's vision of stakeholder capitalism is critical for other countries to look at right now, because anyone who thinks that the attacks on ESG means that stakeholder capitalism is dead are completely wrong. The right-wing voices attacking ESG are not calling for a return to shareholder-first capitalism. They want different stakeholders to be respected, like national security interests and cultural values and populist economic interests. And Japan is very skilled at stakeholder capitalism in a way that others can learn from. And the very last thing I'll say about Trump that I think is critical to understand him is if you use a framework that Goldman Sachs used to teach its new employees to distinguish between goal, strategy, and tactics, it makes things look a lot clearer, because Trump's goal is not any McKinsey PowerPoint goal. His instinct is dominance at all costs of everything, both his family and the country, the two entwined in his eyes. But around him are strategies, which his team are essentially creating. Thank God they are currently rival competing strategies, but their strategies broadly are about geoeconomic power, very broadly. I won't go into the details of that, but there are fights between the Trump's factions. There are three main factions, and they're fighting each other. But the tactics are the things that grab the front page newspapers, headlines, like the bullying, like the tariffs, like the threats, like the dramas, like all the stuff we saw in Davos. And people are mixing up the tactics with the strategy and with the goal. He can drop the tactics on a dime. Doesn't mean that he somehow dropped his goal or even his strategy. They're just tactics. So do not confuse the tactics with the strategy. That's critical.
Thank you, Gillian. Before we open up for questions, I want to turn, last but not least, to Satoshi, and to sort of reflect on the broader question. I mean, you mentioned dominance, Gillian. When it comes to the Middle East, Donald Trump loves to present himself as the great peacemaker, whether it's in forcing a resolution of the Palestine-Israel crisis, or now in terms of rebuilding and reconstruction. His new Board of Peace seems to be a rival to the United Nations. So even, and again, a different type of tactic, but nonetheless, it's striking that the person who will make the final decisions in the Board of Peace is unambiguously Donald Trump, which sort of echoes your point, Gillian, about wanting to be the dominant player in all of these discussions. And Robin's point about being wary about not knowing what comes next. I mean, we seem to be at a point with the USS Abraham Lincoln now deployed to the region, all of the uncertainty about what's happening in Iran, where we've seen more than 5,000 people killed, 28,000 people arrested. When we think about tactics, some people have made allusions to Richard Nixon's madman approach of threatening fire and fury. We saw that during the first administration. We seem to be seeing more of these threats. How do you assess America's role in the Middle East? Is it helpful or unhelpful? And what do you anticipate will come out of that region in terms of the impending crisis over Iran and some of the other issues that you were raising with us today over lunch?
Thank you very much for giving me this position. Without being on the table, you will be on the dish. So, Middle East. So we are talking about a rule-based order and its crisis. But from the Middle East point of view, they are they feel more vindicated. For long years they have been got preaches and sermons about how they behave better. But with the Trump first and the second Trump administration now, openly they are, they mean a regional powers in the Middle East are recognized as forces, almost indigenously forming the order in the regional order without much instructions or dictations from the United States. It's basically it's up to you. That's a message a strong message from the U.S. president, incumbent U.S. president. So basically the leading a nation in the Middle East are now basically happy about that the change in the overall global order. They are now in the front runner in forming the new order. Of course. So basically that's the situation. They they don't like hypocrisy, like more than a Canadian leader dislike it. So now it's their own question. What kind of order do they form among the a major regional powers? It means regional powers starting from where? It might show your position, but Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, Israel, and more smaller but effective countries, powers like UAE or Qatar. Of course, we don't forget about Egypt, even though we sometimes forget nowadays. There are multiple players in the region, in the Middle East region. They are competing, and also they are always realigning with each other and searching for some balance, fluid but some balance structure. So you mentioned about a Palestine issue. I know it's sometimes Palestine without Palestinians, but there's some U.S. a proposed approach to new approach to Palestine, and also imminent attack on Iran. But actually, my concern is more fundamental one. It's the recent realignment or some almost open feud among the very basic components of this regional order. That means among GCC countries, on the one side, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, on the other side, the United Arab Emirates. So I think more ominous sign or threatening development in the past months is actually not Iran, not Palestine. It's in the GCC, and there are now the ages, the era has ended when we just divided the Middle East region into two. Like on the one hand, Iranian, axis or resistance camp in remaining anti-West, anti-American camp, starting from Iran and other non-state actors in Yemen, in Lebanon, and somewhere else. But and on the other side, there was a so-called Saudi camp or moderate camp, Saudi and Egypt after expelling Muslim Brotherhood. Actually, recently, particularly after the Israeli success in military action last year, actually Iran as a threat, common threat on the GCC are effectively eliminated, already militarily eliminated, even though the regime itself, Islamic Republic regime still exists, but it's calamity for Iranians, it might be, but for other countries except Israel, facing with weakened Iran across the Gulf, for them, Iran is not the issue. So we are facing with different condition in which a new alignment, a new alliance with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and leading regional powers like Turkey, Egypt, and also adjacent power, nuclear power, Pakistan, and Israel and the United Arab Emirates is in a way becoming outcast in this circumstances. So the situation is fluidly changing, and we must have to more carefully watch it. So actually, the euphoria about after the Maduro, Venezuela, a decapitation success, and also last year's Israeli a successful military operation. We might have we might have expected Iranian regime can fall easily, but actually it's not. So that's a difficult issue, and we have some problem in grasping with this situation in the Middle East. We are always late finding out the quickly evolving a balancing act, multifaceted balance in the region. So that's my word.
That's really helpful. And a powerful reminder of how we shouldn't necessarily be driven by the news agenda in understanding where the next challenges are going to come from. Let's now open it up for questions from the floor. We have about 20 minutes. We have a microphone that's moving around. Let's start on the left-hand side here. If you can wait for the mic, and when you ask your question, please identify yourself. And if there's a specific person you want to focus your question on, that would be very helpful. And please keep your question short, since we have a lot of hands up.
Thank you very much. I'm David Cope from the rival college to this one, Clare Hall. I wanted to pick up on a point that Hosoya-sensei made, which I found very interesting, and first time I've actually heard it orchestrated. Your plan B, or one of your plan Bs. If I take you back to, say, 1850, if somebody had said, within the next 50 years, Britain and France are going to form an alliance together, they'd said, you're out of your mind. We've been fighting each other for more than 500 years. How could we possibly? Of course, it was called the Entente Cordiale. And it was in response to a wider external threat. And so I find it rather interesting that you have raised the possibility there might be
some form of accommodation between China and Japan. Japan's not doing very well at the moment. Its policy on Taiwan has been an absolute disaster. But I'd like to hear you explore that a little bit more. The idea that there could be some rapprochement, some sort of common understanding. Thank you.
While Yuichi is composing his thoughts, let's take other questions. Let's take 2 or 3. Over here, yeah.
Thank you very much for insightful discussion. I'm Iwasa from UCL. I'm currently pursuing Master Public Administration there. I'd like to ask in which area Japan and UK can pursue more collaboration in terms of especially economic aspect, because in even if we pursue that the plan A dash which Professor Hosoya mentioned, I think Japan has been currently going through the economic stagnation, which is sometimes mentioned as lost 3 decades. And I think UK has also been going through some inflation, and that's gonna be obstacles, I think. So I've read some of Professor John Nelson Wright's written Chatham House report on the Japan-UK global seminar series as well, but that was several years ago, and also Sir Robin Nivet has also written some articles there as well. And you've been mentioned.
Is your question directed at a particular person on the panel?
Not particularly, but maybe Sir Robin Nivet or Professor John Nelson Wright would be. I'm not sure. Yeah, you mentioned the soft power education, or it's been military collaboration between Japan and UK as well. But in recent years, what would you say? Which area would you say we should collaborate more? In nowadays, I think.
Okay, great, thank you. Gentleman here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Jan from Adastra think tank, Ukraine. My question relates to the shape of the discussion in overall. I noticed that the most discussion focused on Japan's perspective on the alliance with the United Kingdom. But what's particular about the United Kingdom in terms of just before my eyes is the last year strategic defense strategy of the United Kingdom. And Japan mentioned maybe several times here, and mostly in the context of GCAP and a little bit of AUKUS. So my question is there even the political will of the cooperation, UK political will, cooperation with Japan? Because for now it seems to me Japan is more interested in this cooperation than United Kingdom. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with Yuichi and your response to this idea of Sino-Japanese rapprochement.
Yeah. Definitely. Thank you very much, David, for your question. Wonderful, interesting question. Well, the reason why I mentioned about the possibility of that option is because of a generational change. Younger generation Japanese people tend to think that, number one, we don't like war. To avoid war, based upon very strong pacifist tradition, we should do everything. So entering into the sphere of Chinese influence would be maybe to those people, youngsters, one option to avoid a war. So if I think China knows it, Chinese government knows it, that the Japanese people tend to have a very strong pacifist tradition. So sometimes intentionally, from my viewpoint, China threatened both Japan and Taiwan by mentioning about the war. So by doing it, I think that the many youngsters, Japanese people who favors strong pacifist tradition, tend to think that, we shouldn't enter into a war. To enter into a war would be the worst scenario. So this is one consideration. But I think that the anti-China sentiment is also very strong. And we see that the China is becoming more and more dictatorial, authoritarian. That's why we tend to think that their regime is quite different from ours. So I think that both Taiwanese and the Japanese people also tend to think that we don't like to abandon our way of life. So it's a way, a kind of, I think, strike the balance between the two necessity to avoid war on one hand, to abandon our political regime or way of life. So if the possibility of, number one, war is expanding, and if the United States would become much less willing to engage in the region, I think Japanese people would think in a different way. But I think that this is quite unlikely scenario.
Perhaps Robin and Gillian, you could reflect on those two questions about an asymmetry in terms of the UK-Japan relationship, and if you want to elaborate, Gillian, on the sort of specific areas where our two countries should be prioritizing relations.
Thanks. I was just thinking about this. I made a note to myself to want to say something about the difficulty that Britain's found itself in with the SDR compared to the integrated review, the strategic defence, in any case, the long one, that was done a few years earlier. That famously announced a British tilt to the Indo-Pacific, and that tilt, as many, I think, other people were probably involved here as well in trying to feed ideas into the most recent SDR run by the Starmer government. The sense of a trade-off between Britain committing to Europe's security and Britain having some type of role in Indo-Pacific security was painted much more starkly, especially if you've got a Trump administration that has just said in its National Defence Review, we're committed still to the Indo-Pacific, but hey, the Europeans can look after Europe, basically is what they've said. And we've heard from Elbridge Colby and others in the Department of War that they really don't need Britain's help in the Indo-Pacific. Don't bother. In fact, we don't like it when you send a carrier strike group there. So it is a very difficult, given what I said earlier, of how dependent we are on America, to then go against what America is saying we should or shouldn't be doing in the Indo-Pacific. It puts Britain in a difficult position. But as I think I indicated earlier, I think Britain's going to have to work out what its interests are and try to stick with them within the realm of what is materially possible in terms of money and defence. We do have the five powers defence arrangement. We have a very close relationship with Japan. This whole seminar is based around it. So I'm not going to repeat all of that. I was struck by the fact that not only do we have Britain do its second carrier strike group visit to Japan and to other parts of East Asia and Southeast Asia recently, but we've had Japanese fighters for the first time ever, yes, with accompanying aircraft coming and visiting the UK and other European countries. So my view on this would be, if I had a seat in government, is there's not a lot we can do. We just materially don't have that much we can stretch into the region, but we cannot do less. And that would be a really negative signal, especially if you stick with the bigger part of the strategy, which is, I think, one of the most important legacies of what came out of the Biden administration was the linkage of America's Pacific and Atlantic allies together. Japan, South Korea, Australia getting involved in European defense, us thinking more about Indo-Pacific defense. That strikes me as a sensible long-term approach to take. Otherwise, America could divide and rule us, or a Trumpian type of America could divide and rule us. So I think we need to stick with it, would be my sense. I don't know if we have the political will for it, but I think it's definitely the right approach to take. I'll let maybe Gillian say stuff about that. I can imagine areas we might collaborate, but not my area of specialty.
The reason my daughter ended up in Japan last year teaching snowboarding in a gap year was because she couldn't get a visa to go to France or Germany or Switzerland. Japan, however, is really easy to go and work in. And one of the first steps immediately that both countries should do is encourage visa-free travel and send boatloads of young people into each other's country. It is a tragedy that Japanese students studying in Western universities have dropped off a cliff in recent years. And to invest in the long-term relationship, we absolutely have to send as many kids as we can in both directions to understand and learn about each other. Point one. Point two is that there's a huge amount of collaboration that could be done on advanced manufacturing. not just in robotics and AI. Quantum is an area. Some of this is happening in Cambridge. We have the Hitachi lab, we have the Mitsubishi Heavy lab in the area of aeronautics and things. We should be doubling, quadrupling down on that immediately. I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of trying to create more partnerships on the financial side. Both sides have an interest and incentive to do that. And it's much easier for the UK these days to deal with Japan and Tokyo rather than Hong Kong. And yes, Singapore's hoovering up a lot of stuff, but actually Japan is another very obvious place to be doing that too. So I think there's a huge amount of partnership that can be done right now. And I would strongly urge our Japanese friends to be willing and ready to play more of an assertive role on the world stage. That started already. We've heard already about Prime Minister Abe, and I absolutely salute what he did, and I salute what you did to help him do that. But Japan right now has so many lessons to teach people. And last but not least, obviously the UK could and should be helping Japan on the defence and military side a lot more. And I very much hope that this develops in the coming years, because Japan's biggest problem right now with defence is not getting to 5% GDP, although there's obviously popular voting pressure against that. It's simply finding the troops, the people who want to be soldiers, because that is unbelievably hard. And again, that's an area where the UK could help, and nothing else, just by using some soft power on both sides.
Great, thank you. And your message about education will go down very well. I think both in my department and across the university, we've seen a really sharp decline in Japanese students coming here, so we need a lot more of that.
Immediately.
Let's take another round of questions. First on the left, then in the middle, and then over here on the right-hand side.
Thank you very much. Edward Howell from The Other Place. Robin, you mentioned South Korea, but I'd like to direct this question to our Japanese colleagues on the panel. Where does South Korea fit into Japan's broader considerations of its alliance with the United States, but also perhaps not replacing the United States, but supplementing it, particularly given the history of Japan-South Korea ties? The current South Korean president's first overseas visit was not to the United States, but to Japan, to then Prime Minister Ishiba.
Okay, and then a couple of rows back in the middle. Yeah. Just there.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is a privilege to be here. My question is very simple. My name is Tarun. I'm from University of Cambridge Judge Business School. My question is regarding, I think anything that has happened in history and what is happening now, the biggest difference is, probably according to me, is information war. And I would like to invite some optimistic thoughts around, if one nation controls masses across the globe, across generations, in terms of what we see, what we consume, then anything that we do in the back end, how do we tackle the problem of misinformation, disinformation going ahead? Thank you.
And then right over here.
Thank you very much. I'm Andrew Fisher, and I've recently completed a PhD in medieval Japanese history. My question is, what I see that's as a commonality between the UK and Japan is that they both share the relative favor of Trump, personally. And I think part of this is because of concerted efforts on Prime Minister Abe's part. And on the UK, maybe there's a bit of innate love for the UK, the royal family. But I'm wondering, have these concerted efforts towards appeasement or currying favor with Trump, some might describe it as obsequiousness, have they paid off? I think if you look at King Charles and talking to Trump about Ukraine, it worked for a few weeks and then he flipped around. So I'm wondering, does this seem to be a strategy that's shown any fruits, or is it a waste of time? Thank you.
Okay, why don't we start with the Korea question? Maybe, Tom, would you like to kick off, and then we'll ask our other colleagues, Yuichi and Satoshi.
I know this is on the record. Nonetheless, I would say the following. South Korea is something akin to a fast, brutally swinging, moving swing for Japan. Sometimes it shows its maritime identity when it's getting closer to its maritime allies, namely the United States, Japan, and the Philippines of late. South Korea today is in that mode, which is why South Korean President, even after his successful visit to China, meeting Xi Jinping, came to Japan and willing to play the drum together with Sanae Takaichi. And he is talking about increased, enhanced collaboration among these nations. But it could change very much fast. It could change like this. So we're all cautious, but take the moment and seize the moment, I think is the mantra with which Sanae Takaichi is actually working. If I may add something that we have heard from Gillian, all brilliant ideas, but look at the Arctic region, which is 21st century's great game theater. And if you look at the North Pole from above the sky, you can see 4 nations who could collaborate between and among their air forces, for instance. The UK, Canada, the United States, and Japan. These are 4 countries that circle the North Pole. I should call this yet another version of Quad. Why shouldn't we be creative in proposing such an idea? As Gillian said, Japan's been known to be a country that punches way below its weight. And now it's got to change.
Thank you. Let's pass it on to Satoshi.
So I just a quick response to the question from the gentleman about the information war. And the Middle East is obviously in the one of the focal points of the real information war going on right now. And I almost sarcastically make a prophecy before like around Christmas time. In the coming week, in the end of the holiday, the Christmas Day holiday and the New Year holiday, will see something in the Middle East. I mean, the end of Christmas, Western Christmas and the New Year period is actually nothing for Middle Eastern people. But on the Western side, the world leaders are relatively free to conspire. So in this season, and media, people in the media is taking holidays off. So there are less coverage on the relatively few expertise. So in this period, this information war is particularly rampant, and it becomes sometimes it causes a fatal result without clear foundation of reality. So this year, last year, and this year, we are seeing that, and some even influential British media are in a way helping this distortion, confusion. So we must be very careful about this issue, particularly in the Middle East, because there are gap between Middle East reality and what the media, global media, is reporting. So this, in the Middle East, this is very a serious issue. And just a quick note, finally, for me, you may have final words, but talking about this issue of the world global order and alliances, and Japan and the UK, Japan, the US. From the Middle Eastern point of view, I feel uneasy about it. Basically, it's about Japan, part of the so-called Western alliance. So, but actually, and we need to sell our alliance. I'm totally, supporting this alliance. But at the same time, if we sell this idea, Japan, part of the Western alliance, almost automatically, so in the Middle East, they have negative, response because they don't like, Western alliance at all, and they are not attracted to it, even though most of them have strong security relation with the United States. But in identity issue still is still important, and for them, the part of the Western alliance is not their choice. So sometimes Japanese, mainstream policy thinkers are selling the wrong thing to to the people. The rest of the world aside from the Western alliance. So that's my some notes.
Thank you very much. I just like to answer two questions quite briefly. A question coming from Edward about South Korea, and also a question from Andrew about UK-Japan approach to Trump. I forgot to mention about the most important option in my initial talk. Japan has a really important option to take, and I would strongly recommend to take that option, which I didn't mention. The option is the cooperation among like-minded middle powers, including both South Korea and the UK. This can continue. And I think that, when I met with Prime Minister Takaichi Sanae before she became Prime Minister in last May, I had the impression that she has in her mind as her diplomatic agenda 2 pillars. One is the continuation of the FOIP that Ambassador Suzuki and Taniguchi-san worked very hard to promote in the second Abe administration. So Takaichi-san is really keen on continuing the pillar, the policy, number one. Number two, to promote the cooperation among like-minded liberal democracies. So these 2 pillars continue under the Prime Minister Takaichi's premiership, I suppose. So in that way, I think Japan is willing, and I think quite resolute in promoting this, covering many countries, of course, including South Korea. And I think that Taniguchi-san is quite right in saying that it is difficult to predict the future course of South Korean foreign policy. But at the same time, when we invited Keio Center for Strategy, invited previous President Yoon Song-yeol to Keio University, responding to a question coming from student, President Yoon strongly advocated the necessity of continuation of the stronger tie between the 2 countries, because this is a must. Because we don't have any other options. So that's why he particularly emphasized on the importance of the generational change. Younger generation Koreans quite positively see Japanese role in international community. In that way, I think that UK, Japan, and South Korea, there are many countries who can collaborate with. But at the same time, in addition to this, as is mentioned by Robin, I think that many Americans worry about the future. So much more than before, the experts and also officials, they have much closer consultation with the Japanese government. Because they worry about the future under the current president, I suppose, even though they cannot vocally mention about it. That's why they come closer to Japan, Japanese government officials, embassy, and so on. So in that way, I think that there are many chances that the cooperation among like-minded partners or like-minded middle power can do many things in future.
Robin and Gillian, just to give you both a chance to have 2 last words, as it were, before we close.
So quick last word, which answers, I think, Andrew's question is the most relevant of that group for me. And just say one last thing. Has appeasement, was your term, paid off? The Americans very famously used the term about the Brits during the golden era of China of doing constant accommodation. And I think I'll call it accommodation rather than appeasement. And I suppose net, my judgment, we're going to see here Julian's view, my net is I think it's pretty much paid off. We got the first trade deal, 10% tariff rate, which is obviously one of the best, even though the 10%'s somewhat hedged in various sectors. We got the pharmaceutical deal through recently, which is, I think, a pretty good deal, obviously, depending where you sit in the British political spectrum. I think on foreign policy, wherever Trump is, the fact is US intelligence is still going into Ukrainian forces, vitally important, and we're able to buy some of their best equipment, which they could be using to supplement their reserves, which are depleted, and be selling to other people. So I think on that front, and in the end, he did climb down on Greenland. I'm not saying because we forced him to, but having the solid view on it was important. I think that's a very important element of it here is domestically, it can play badly if it's seen as appeasement, and obviously in a very combative political systems we have in the UK. But my reading, at least, trying to be apolitical about it, is that for all of his difficulties with his domestic policy, Starmer's foreign policy is just about sitting right. And Trump gave him a gift horse by making his comments about NATO troops being useless in Afghanistan, which Starmer jumped on as quickly as he could to show he can be tough. So, I think we're doing fine. We're buying time. We have to buy time, but it is not stable. It is not a stable relationship. Any moment it could go wrong. The tech deal on investment is good, but now I think the prosperity and technology deal is again in abeyance. You can't trust America. So accommodate, buy time, don't trust, build up alternatives. And then obviously I very much support the views that Julian said at the beginning, middle powers teaming up, your comment about liberal democracies being together. And I think we all share that view. Kind of G7 plus is a thing I've been going on for a while. And I agree with it. My last comment I want to make is more political, I suppose. I think in the world we're in right now, somebody made a very good comment to me the other day. You've got to know where your red lines are. In a Trumpian world, you can accommodate up to a point. But then you have to know where your red lines are. By the way, I think we need to know individually where our red lines are. I hope, in any case, I think we all need to know where they are, because you can be put in if you don't know where your red line is, you can be pushed back over it and suddenly find you can't get forward to it again. And Trump can be so bullying in his style and in the reality of his threats. It can be very, very dangerous. So knowing where your red line is, Europe showed it news where its red line was on Greenland and on Ukraine. And as long as we stick on those two red lines, making sure Ukraine remains a sustainably sovereign state, and you do not overwhelm people's right to self-determination and territorial integrity, those are red lines no European country should give up, nor should we individually. I think we'll be okay.
Very briefly, the relationship between Trump and other countries up until now has looked a lot like a battle between the Boy Scouts and the mafia. Both Japan and Britain tend to still believe in Boy Scout principles of rules-based order and trying to be collaborative and broadly nice. In order to fight back against the mafia, they're going to have to, 1, make clear their red lines, 2, think very hard about what they have to offer in a transactional relationship, and 3, a pack of Boy Scouts sticking together is stronger than an individual Boy Scout against the mafia. And that has got to be the message going forward. As I say, I cannot stress strongly enough the importance of having exchanges, starting with the younger generation right now. And I can't stress strongly enough the importance of academic exchanges and business exchanges in fields like AI and quantum right now, because the tech hegemony is still being contested. And the fact that Japan has shipping is vitally important around issues like the Arctic. The fact that Britain has so much finance is equally important the other way around. There are people in America who absolutely want to keep a sane approach. In Davos, Senator Coons, Senator Bukowski were out there desperately trying to be bipartisan and uphold some Boy Scouts value. But if we're going to see the Boy Scouts not being crushed by the mafia, we have to be incredibly smart and we have to stick together.
Thank you for that rallying call to arms, or cooperation, or solidarity, however we want to frame it. I think this has been a really fascinating discussion. For me, there are 4 points that stand out, and to echo what people have said. One is, in terms of working together, I think someone said memorably, we can't do less, so we have to do more. Secondly, I think it's been demonstrated through all of the various strengths in the bilateral relationship between the UK and Japan that were itemized, just how important innovation is. Innovation technologically, but also, as Tom said very memorably, I think innovation in the diplomatic space, continuing, if you like, the legacy of late Prime Minister Abe, when we think about a new Quad, for example, in the Arctic. The third point, and here there's perhaps a little bit of a tension. Gillian, you said, don't trust anyone. And that seems really underlined by the sense of shock that the change in American policy has precipitated. But there's also a sense in which it seems to me that the UK and Japan are 2 countries that trust one another. And they trust one another because they've built up so many personal ties and such a long history of cooperation. And that's something I think perhaps to celebrate. The last point, which is really the point that I think all of the panelists have highlighted, and Satoshi in talking about the Middle East highlighted this, is that change can come from anywhere. And change can come in ways that surprise us. So we need to remain vigilant. We need to be aware of things that we haven't anticipated. And who knows what we'll be talking about next year when we get together for what I hope will be another stimulating discussion and collaboration between us and our Japanese partners. I want to thank you, the audience, for your questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of them, but I think it's been a really rewarding discussion, and I want to thank our sponsors, and I want to thank the ambassador for coming and participating. And with that, I declare our seminar over.